Welcome everybody. My name is Vicky Hanna and I'm going to be taking our final week 3 of 3 on the unit CHCDFV001. This is diploma youth work and we're wrapping up this unit. So it's a very difficult subject for a lot of people. I want to just make sure that you're okay while you're listening to me go over just the final summary of our week. We've had our live class. We didn't record class this week. We did lots of role plays, and because that topic is very sensitive, we decided that we would just sit with that for our live class. You have a full recording, a capsule of all the underpinning knowledge, and you've got lots of other resources that we've sent out. But for our final week, I just wanted to be able to give you an overview and walk you through 1, what it's like for the client, 2, what it's like for you, and 3, specifically what it's actually like for young people who are coming through growing up in a situation where there has been complex trauma through their developmental years, how they go from victim to offender, and how difficult it is for you and all of us when we're in the field, working frontline, really understanding that this is not about behaviours of concern, this is about what happened to you. So my focus tonight will be around how to look after you, how to have a good understanding around what domestic family violence is, to be able to assist you as a worker and to also work with our clients who are vulnerable, who are often young and most times will not have a voice. So just to start with, our live class did cover a lot of the skills and we were wrapping up, which we like to do in our final week, anytime that we're doing a unit. I am sending out some resources, so for anyone who could not make it to class as well. You can do this in your own pace, of course, and we welcome you in classes. So some of the resources you will recognise them from domestic family violence agencies, and some of them are haters, and then some of them come from sector as well. So let's begin. So here we have in front of us is the power and control cycle, and we also have the equity cycle of what non-violence might be. It's just as helpful for you to have the what is happening and then what does it need to look like if we were turning it around for our clients. Before we get started, let me do our acknowledgement to country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. This is the week of NAIDOC week, so there's been lots of local and then national recognition around the First Nations people. So I'd like to extend this acknowledgement out to any of our Haida learners who might be watching this recording, and also anyone that was in our class tonight. So the overview of the workshop is live class where we unpacked a lot more of it was the impact of shame on domestic family violence and how that impacts our client and ourselves, generational trauma and role repetition. Why is it that a young person that grows up in a situation where it is unsafe in domestic family violence and yet will often go from victim to offender and repeat those patterns? The key micro skills for sector workers, real world case scenarios and responses, role plays in this unit are 3. So you will be doing 3 different clients. You'll do Diane, Priyanka and Oliver. So each of those you will need to do, record those. You'll need to have somebody play the client for you. That needs to be quite authentic. You will need to coach them and also look after them as much as yourself while you're doing this topic, which is very sensitive. Oops, sorry. So we talk about what is domestic family violence. It is abuse. So just some of those forms can be verbal, physical, psychological, financial, sexual, gender, spiritual, cultural. The types of abuse can be coercive, tracking, online, stalking, victim to offender, child to parent, partner to partner, sibling to sibling, civil matters and criminal matters, and then the protection that sits around that. So I just wanted to bring up here for you the iceberg model. So we use this in practical frameworks, strategies. How do I help someone, especially if you're a person who hasn't got a lived experience around this? Where do you get your knowledge from? You have your learner's guide and it's got lots of information. There's some great additional videos that we send out to you in your resources. And then there's also one I'm going to bring your attention to, which is a Hader one, and that's done with 2 trainers, just selecting one of the clients from this, just to give you an example. But we have some great resources for you on how to do your own role plays. So when it says 15 minutes or no greater than 15 minutes, know that you need to do 15 minutes in your role play. So if you send in 7 or 3, it will just get sent back to you. When we ask you to do role plays, it's such a small portion of the time that we would have with a client. Normally we would have, say, 45 minutes with a client in session, and then we would have 15 minutes to write our notes. So you do have some written work with your assessments. We just ask of you to do 15, but there are three particular clients, and you will do all 3 in your assessments, unless, of course, you've come to class and we've done them live with you. So using both clear thinking and persuasive storytelling, we do that in safe language or our dialogue. So start with the event. What is it that brought you in today? And then the visible part of the problem. So with one of the clients, they've physically been injured. We weren't there, so we don't know the story. So part of our storytelling and our persuasive storytelling is to be able to encourage that person about what abuse is, do a risk assessment with them, and be able to help them with what it is that they're seeking assistance from you in that role play, where you will play the role as Michelle or Michael, depending on how you want to identify. And if you do that at the beginning and you just introduce it, then of course you can use your own name throughout the rest of that. So the visible part of the problem, make sure that you've got all of the issues there. What events? Has there been a pattern? Are there underlying structures? And then what other mental health, psychache that might be happening for them? And then working into that, the beliefs and the assumptions, and then the cultural norms that sit around that as well. These resources will come out to you. What's the learning objective on our final week? The most important, the number one thing, is to explore the neurobiology of shame. Why does it take 7 times on average for people to leave a domestic family violence situation? To understand domestic family violence cycles and shame responses, to apply your micro skills with empathy and care, and to reflect on the victim, offender, and then the generational patterns. What is that love language? This is what I grew up. This is my norm. And then breaking those patterns. When we talk about coercive control, DAVO might be an acronym that you hear of, which stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. So it means that someone may DAVO another person, which is a term that often gets used in this by clients just as much as it does in workers, where it may be that that person is in complete denial, that the other person attacks them for speaking out, that they reverse and try and victim blame and assign that blame over to the person. Look what you have made me do, those types of things. And that is done by the offender or the person who uses violence. So there are 3 clients, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about client number 3, Oliver. So Oliver presents, this is what I want you to do, is to have a look at the risk. Is he medium? You need to be able to work that out, whoever plays your Oliver. Oliver repeats the domestic family violence relationship patterns seen in their own childhood. The approach is about, from you, empowerment practice, giving agency back to Oliver, and warm referrals to domestic family violence support if that's what Oliver is seeking. Housing, does he need that? Social emotional well-being. And in your toolbox, we build self-worth for our clients and we follow up. That's what Oliver's scenario is about. And then some Q&A around what is the security risk here and the focus on the client's own goals. That's important. So here I've given you a link around the example Oliver's role play, and we can show that when I'm doing a recording, but I'm sending it out to you. We have a lot of resources for role plays, but this particular one is 2 people playing the role. One is the support worker and one is the client, Oliver. But this is about an intergenerational survivor of domestic family violence, not really understanding what it was that he grew up around. He was estranged from his father. His father recently passed. And so then comes that complicated grief, things left unsaid, and the work that you may be doing with Oliver. Oliver has found himself in a relationship with his partner, Max, and there are patterns that seem familiar for Oliver, and the worker will start to explore what some of those are. So 3 clients, we've chosen Oliver for you with an example of how to do the role play. What we do when we're assessing you in your role plays is we look at these things. We look at soft, seamless referral pathways. What are the priority of needs? Is it housing? Does he need that? Is it a crisis? Or is it more around that social, emotional, psychological well-being? Building strength-based and then following up to acknowledge that what is happening for Oliver is real, to believe Oliver, and then to make sure that Oliver knows that he can keep coming back and speaking with us. So when we're working with people who have had ongoing abuse, and some of the sector challenges for you as a worker is the post-separation contact and coercion. Just removing someone from that unsafe environment does not mean that they are free of the injury, the psychological injury that has happened to them. It's complex. And that's what coercion is. The breaches of protection orders by both parties, like answering a message when there's supposed to be no contact, if it says not within 100 metres and you allow them in, the victim is in breach of those orders equally as the person, the user of violence is. And so it can end up being what's often referred to as a cycle. Because they are unable to unhook. Clients staying in location of abuse is a really big one when we're working with young people, because for a young person who's grown up around this, that's the scene of the crime. So every door that slams could re-traumatize a young person. Trigger is what it might be. Raised voices, even though they may be safe in that moment of time, it actually comes back up and they wear that physically. So we talk about body keeps score. A young person can be in that fight, flight, freeze or fawn, that state of survival for decades if they are left unsupported and there's no hope and healing that's been put in that place during that time. We will often see maybe the parent who is identified as the primary victim, but our work, our focus sits around young people. This is a diploma of youth work, and I want to make sure that we never leave what is that like for the children growing up in that, because it's quite likely that pattern will repeat itself and we will be working with from victim to offender. So I want us to understand that pattern, what that cycle is, and then where our role is in being able to make different choices, have different options, provide different support, and help build those skills to be able to recognise and respond to what is domestic and family violence. So playing parents against each other, discrediting or de-edifying or speaking badly about that parent, it continues to traumatise young people and it keeps them in that abuse. And then hooked on emotional entanglement. In some cases, if a parent or an adult is talking about what happened to them in front of a child, that is an injury, and it is viewed by the authorities as a psychological injury because you're keeping that young person in a state of feeling unsafe, that the adult that's caring for them hasn't got things under control. It's still living. It's part of our day-to-day. So it's something that if we're working with the adults, we have to be very mindful that we're guiding them on how to look after their children, even if their children aren't part of that session with you. Who else is in this situation and who is the most vulnerable? So if we don't deal with this, then we're dealing with the inner child as well. So we have to look at healthy boundaries, feeling safe, self-compassion, self-care, assertiveness, finding voice, speaking on their own behalf, self-advocacy, and secure attachments rather than having attachment disorder. So sending out these resources for you, but these are the inner child wounds. There's guilt, abandonment, rejection, mistrust, shame, injustice, neglect, and judgment of self and others as well. If I was a better kid, maybe that wouldn't have happened. If I was a better kid, maybe my parents wouldn't have split up. And oftentimes young people are also the target of that abuse. So your micro skills, which is what we're going to be assessing you on in your role plays, your practitioner skills, is empathic listening, reframing the reflections. So is what you're saying, this is just paraphrasing it and getting it back to them. Trauma-informed inquiry, so compassionate inquiry. Naming shame without shaming the client. And then validation and normalization. So sometimes people can think, well, if I was a better partner or if I was a better parent, it was understandable under the circumstances that you've been trying to navigate. So that's what normalizing it, not normalize to minimize, and there's a difference. Letting them know that their response is normal given the circumstances and that there is no blame and no shame. Our toolbox talks are part of our discussions, but then they're also a resource for you. Boundaries in trauma-informed work, you need to hone those skills, working with silence and resistance, not feeling like you've got to fill those gaps. And then also, if someone is reluctant, if it takes on average 7 times to leave a domestic family violence, a situation of unsafe and abuse, then know that there can be some resistance to leaving. It's fear-based and they don't know us. So therefore they do not have that trust in us. That can take time. Post-separation risk and contact. The moment someone has taken that action, it increases the risk. So you can understand better why someone might go, this will only trigger everything. It'll make them worse. I can't. it's just going to get really bad. And they're not wrong when they say that you cannot protect them if you're seeing your client 1 hour a week. So we need to make sure that we've got wraparound supports and that they're making these decisions. And then, of course, if there's children involved, your priority will be to make sure that they're placed either with kin, other care, or you're going to be mandatory reporting this anyway if there's children involved. When we do role play number 3 or talk about Oliver watching that recording, there are no children involved. The people who are in that situation, the victim, as well as the person of violence who's using that, they are over 18 years of age. They're over 24 years of age. So there's no mandatory reporting there. It's different. So I've chosen that one because it's the softer story. But when we're actually working in that space of a young person being involved under the age of 18, it is mandatory reporting. It's your duty of care. And you've said that to your client at the beginning. You've let them know that the only time you would share anything that could not stay private or confidential would be if there was a risk to them or a risk to others. And this is about safety, and their safety is important to you. And if they can't see that for themselves, that's where your duty of care comes in for those children and even for the victim survivor. Avoiding secondary shame, so we don't come in heavy with, I'm going to have to do this mandatory reporting. It's like, I think I'd like to let my supervisor know this does sound like it is really unsafe at the moment. So in your sector, you're trained and your supervisor is trained or your line manager is trained as well. But if you're referring someone to a GP, they're mandatory reporters. But no one comes down heavy like quasi-government or quasi-police. It's we are working in the community sector, therefore we are not a public servant, and we are not the agents who deliver the standards and the legislation. We work inside those guidelines, but our primary concern is always the client. In fact, you may find yourself having to advocate on behalf of your client against people in authority who won't act or are using that name, blame and shame approach around having that higher level of power. This is an injured person that you're working with, psychologically injured, but it is an injury nonetheless. Staying client-centered in hard truths. So you're going to have to call it out. You have to say, this is abuse and that's not okay. There's never any excuse for abuse. There are 101 other ways to be able to deal with problems without ever using abuse to do that. Reflection and practice, this sits for you. What did I learn today about? What is shame in relationships? What micro skills do I need to grow? What's my response to victim and offender narratives? What's my own worldview and my lens? Do I have any bias, known or unknown, my unconscious bias? Are you a person with a lived experience, or are you close to someone who has been through that? How safe is it for you to be working in this space without having some of these reflective practices around that? And then being safe, skilled sector ready worker. So understanding shame in childhood is shame is internalised early through rejection, criticism or abuse. Children blame themselves to preserve attachment. This creates maladaptive adult coping mechanisms, example, violence or shutdown. So shame activates the parasympathetic shutdown response. So there's often that survival instinct we talk about as well. So it may cause disassociation, which is a protective behaviour, freezing or collapse. Worker presence and co-regulation are key, which means that we need to regulate with our client. So if a client is rocking it in the chair, we lean forward towards them and we pause. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable with silence. Just because we know it, those sessions when someone is injured, that is not the time to tell them how much we know about everything. It is the time to just sit and be with them. So sitting with someone is compassionate care, is empathy in action, is a micro skill. So worker presence and co-regulation are key to a person feeling safe. So we have vicarious shame, which means it can arise from feeling helpless or mirroring the client in pain. We feel it leaves an imprint on us. But if they return to that situation, there can often be a sense of shame yourself, or you just feel their psyche, their pain. And we need to be mindful of that. Self-awareness and supervision are absolutely critical. So the self-awareness and self-reflection and talking to a supervisor. If you don't speak to a supervisor regularly, you can speak to someone on the other end at Lifeline, 13 11 14, or 13 Yarn if you are First Nation, or Torres Strait Island. It is really common as a worker to just say, look, this one story, it really, yeah, it stayed with me. I felt stuck with this one. I was still thinking about it, even after I left work. I'm not sure I did everything that I could. It's very normal for you to feel like that, especially when you know that that person is still at risk, and yet choosing to go back as well. Your mandatory reporting sits around children. Your duty of care sits around if that person has been assaulted and is at imminent risk of being assaulted again. You can ask for a wellbeing check as well, even if they do go back. And then notice when you're rescue, retreat, or push too hard. So just something to be mindful. Keep a journal, write down what you did well, what you could do differently, and what are some of the other factors around that. Is this just something I need to read up more on that? What's my dialogue when I'm working with clients? What is safe language? Where I'm actually able to make sure that how I approach this is not going to re-injure that client, even though talking to it, what it is that's happened to them can do that anyway. But just notice and reflect on your own. And we can feel shame of not being able to assist, or I could have done something more. So the generational impact of shame is passed through silence, secrecy, and invalidation. So there's your work. I hear you. We can sit in silence, but we're validating. We're not going to keep a secret because that's where the imbalance of power is. And we validate. I believe you. And you are not alone. How can I most help you today? Do you feel safe going home? That's our dialogue. It's our safe language. Clients may repeat patterns unconsciously because that's what coercive control is, to wear somebody down, where they start to doubt that they aren't actually everything that the other person has said, and maybe they will blame themselves. And then naming the pattern invites empowerment or agency. So if we say, so has this ever happened before? How often does this happen? Do you think that that's increasing and escalating? Is it getting harder each time? Sometimes it's like, oh, it is actually. Has there ever been a time where you have been happy? Is there anything going on around you? Any external things going on at the moment? It just brings it out there, because a big part of this is keeping that secret. So coercive control and shame go together. Control behaviours often mask fear and shame by the abuser and the victim. Naming behaviour is not blaming. Support respectful accountability without shame. And I do need to raise that you could be working with the person, the user of violence, as much as the person who is the victim. As a youth worker, You will often walk beside young people who have not been able to yet unpack what happened to them or what they think is normalized behavior because they grew up around that, or they don't know how to manage that rage, that internal rage, and it comes out in other ways. So there is a cycle of abuse around power and control. Tensions build, there's an incident, there's usually reconciliation, and then there's calm. And they're often, like, even calm is referred to as the honeymoon cycle, where that person will woo, and I'm sorry, and I don't know what came over me, all those things on their absolute best behavior, flowers, favorite meal, all those sorts of things. Of what happens in that calm stage of the cycle, that cycle of abuse or power and control. That's one version. So in the it's actually scenario 3. Sorry, guys. So scenario 3 is Oliver, and he did grow up witnessing domestic family violence in his own home, is now in a controlling relationship and feels undeserving of support. And what else is there from death of father? So there's complicated grief, that frozen sadness, not being able to have those conversations with his father about what he witnessed as abuse, and then why is he repeating those patterns in his own life? Why does he think that that is all he is worthy of? So then again, the risk level goes from medium to high because we're identifying signs of ongoing coercive control, a learned helplessness in that situation by the victim, and then trauma bonding. If that person was there at their lowest, then they actually have a vulnerable person, and letting go of them may make that person feel that they'll be vulnerable again. Please ignore scenario 2 because it is not. So do respect autonomy because it's 3. Explore self-worth gently with your client, and then offer warm referrals. What would it be like if I could put you with someone around, say, maybe grief and loss, to help better understand your feelings around your father passing? I'd like to circle back to that. When you're ready, just have a think about it. We'll talk a little more about that when you come back in. That would be how we could have that dialogue. Don't push for immediate separation. Don't overload with information. Assume passivity equals consent. Just because the person is sitting there passive, that they're in agreement with what you're saying. Or are they saying yes because that's what they think you want to hear? So in your toolbox, use language that empowers, that's strength-based, advocacy and accompaniment, which means that you may advocate, be the voice for them based on what you both agreed would happen, or you may walk beside them, because even accessing those services can be stressful, though they may have their own voice, knowing that you are there with them. And then trauma-informed micro skills, really honing what those skills are. In our live class, oftentimes I'll have some really great resources, and I'll invite people to ask me for those. You don't have to be coming to classes to be able to getting some of those resources, but of course, if you're watching the recording, then you will be able to email me or contact the learner support officers and just request any of those trauma-informed resources that people are getting in classes that you may not be joining. So abuse often continues after someone has left, includes stalking, financial control, manipulation if there's children involved. And your focus is the legal, emotional, and social safety of your client, those that your client is responsible for, the most vulnerable if there's children, your peers and your colleagues, and importantly, yourself. And then respect the complexity of clients' decisions. It may not be what you want for them, but we have to respect that. There's a lot more behind even what we would ever hear, because the story is theirs alone to share. Clients may remain emotionally hooked into abusive relationships and the dynamics, those internal family systems. Unhooking is common. Sometimes people will go the other way and disassociate. So we're looking to find that regulated space. So emotionally unhooking from the trauma. So trauma bonds and identity confusion are often common. So the worker role, be firm, kind, and not rescue. Model boundaries and emotional safety. So think about your position in that role. When you're starting out, if you haven't got that experience already, you're entry level in that space. So you will always have a line manager or a supervisor. But while you're studying, study as much as you possibly can. There is so much information out there. LinkedIn is a great site for that. There's a lot of work being done. Classes, we have people who work in the sector, and what I like to refer to our classes as collective wisdom. We tonight, actually, everyone who did the role plays, 6 people did the role plays tonight. What we did was we did peer review as well, and everyone sat in the chair being the client. We chose a different client. We chose client number 1, Diane, in this one that we did in live classes tonight. It doesn't matter because the micro skills are what we're assessing you on. So you need to find out as much as you possibly can. What I look for is healthy professional boundaries, making sure that we use safe language, and that we model those professional boundaries and the emotional safety when we're working with our clients. So protection orders and respect for boundaries, the breaches of orders must be addressed seriously. If you're working with offenders, that piece of paper is a requirement. So right up until, if there's no evidence of assault, but it's unseen and unlikely to be able to capture enough evidence, it sits in the civil courts. It is only when that civil order, which is what a protection order is, not a criminal charge, you can accept it with no admission when you go to court. So you're accepting that there is a matter that has to put a protection order around it. It can be for yourself, protecting you from being in that relationship. Even though you can be separated under one roof, if the police do turn up, or if there is a report around it again, then, and there is a breach of that order, then it becomes a criminal matter if there is evidence to support that claim. So workers should help clients track and report breaches, diarise, keep notes. Remember, because when you're stressed or trauma impacted, exactly when it happened can be really hard to recall because the mind is trying to protect you from remembering. So encourage documentation and system navigation, which means that we need to give them information about their decision making and what it's going to be like. Or if you're not in the role of a domestic family violence support worker, then you're going to do warm referrals and you walk beside them while they're accessing those services. Might be you're there with the phone call, might be that the work comes to your workplace, or you might be able to get consent from the client to do a referral over, and you could do a teleconference with them and they could explain that the client may have lots and lots of questions or not sure. But while you are walking beside them in that space, you are their anchor person. Even if they access other support services away from you, we stay in that space, provided it's part of our role to do that. So when parents are talking about the other parent, parent-child dynamics can be shaped by adult conflict. Avoidance of disparaging the other parent is absolutely paramount. Key. It's confusing for children where they think they can't, so I can't have mum and dad. When you go to family court, it is about the right of a child to have a relationship with both parents if it is safe to do so. People only go to family court because the mediation of how they're going to co-parent failed. Otherwise, you go to mediation, they issue a certificate, they present it to the court and it gets cleared, and then it doesn't go to court. Court is not inevitable. Court is because the mediation has broken down or the risk is so high that mediation is not recommended. Then it means the other party will have to take that person to court. There is legal aid for both parties, by the way, unless, of course, they're not eligible under that financial legal aid is there around financial eligibility. Otherwise, you're paying for your own court. So you need to maintain child safety. That is absolutely the priority. And as someone studying Diploma of Youth Work, that is your primary client at all times, is that young person. Support identity formation without blame. So yes, you are a survivor of domestic family violence. However, there is absolutely no blame. I believe you. I acknowledge that, and you can access our support for as long as you need to, if that is what your service is. If not, then you do that within your performance model, your service model, and you put additional supports around them in a way, in a pace that feels good for the client. Because if you refer them on quickly, they'll think, or you don't want to work with me, or you don't believe me. They're already running that whole dialogue, that diatribe around and around about what they believe to be true, which may not be the case, but they've been living where someone has told them that is the truth. So there are 3 different models around the cycle of violence. So model 1 is the power and control cycle of violence. So there's tension building, acute explosion, that's the incident, the honeymoon reconciliation phase, and it helps clients and practitioners identify abuse patterns over time if we use that particular model to talk to our client rather than we're the ones who are the fountain of all knowing. We let them know that this is actually normal for you to feel this way. This is what is happening. Is any of that familiar? Sometimes that's all it can take, is for someone to know that it isn't actually them, that this is a pattern, this abuse has a pattern. Model 2 demonstrate tactics used to maintain control. So emotional abuse, isolation, intimidation, using children, privilege and gender roles, where there's an imbalance, again, of power. So that one, the Duluth model, is useful for validating lived experience and structuring safety plans. The first one came out in 1973. It's the Warner model, but the Duluth model progressed. So now we start to work with the user of violence more, rather than see that only as let's support the victim, because it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. And what we know for certain is that a lot of the offenders of violence are people who were survivors, and they've gone from victim to offender as well. It's complex. So we need to be able to unpack all of that and really have a good understanding. Some of your research that you're going to be doing for this unit will be around this. So power and control cycle, physical violence and sexual violence is the most extreme as well. So there's economic coercion, intimidation, emotional abuse, the use of isolation, deny, blame and minimize. Oh, I was only joking, comments like that. Using children, and then using male privilege. Now, the reason why that is in there is that predominantly the users of violence are males, but that does not mean in any way that there are not victim survivors who identify as males. What we do know around power and control is that there may be an advantage physically, but that doesn't mean that a male cannot be a victim and their partner could be the user of violence. So in Oliver's, in role play number 3, that is a same-sex relationship. So both genders identify as male. What we're working on is the power and control. And then, of course, model 3, which is more common. We know more about it. We've moved out of that. So all of these things can be true, not just one over another. So coercive control has come into law now in some states and territories. I'm based on Tarrabala Bunda, which is Queensland, and we have only just in July, the month that we're in right now, May, they put it forward to Parliament, voted on, and it has only now become part of the Queensland legislation where coercive control. There's been some real high profile cases that have pushed that. There's Hannah Clark and Alison Baden-Clay are the most prominent ones, but there are others as well. So coercive control focuses on ongoing manipulation and domination without the physical violence. Surveillance, control, threats, and micromanagement often continues post-separation. And it's important for understanding systemic risk and advocating for legal protection, because that other person may have greater means and resources as well. That's where the coercion comes in. So coercive control can look like assuming that consent is there, blaming, degradation, financial abuse, gaslighting, harassment, interrogation, isolating, stalking, technical. Reading your phone, tracking your phone, checking your devices without permission, just going through everything, and then using threats. So here it says, does someone in your life behave like this? This is how we need to frame it to our clients. It's like, what if there is some of these or any of these sort of familiar? Well, we would call that threatening behavior. And then sit with that, give them time to process what they're saying. So your practitioner toolbox, my tips are validate their emotions, not just the actions. Listen for themes of fear and confusion. Avoid rescuing. You're a support agency worker. Follow up with referrals and documentation. Use grounding language to de-escalate the shame. Check your own emotional reactions and biases. Provide space for silence and grief. Debrief difficult conversations with your peers and your colleagues or your line manager. So there is grief in that separation because it's the loss of hope. It's the loss of what it could be. And hope is often what keeps people in that space, which is why, of course, there's that on average 7 times to be able to leave. And there's a lot of stigma around it as well, where people are, well, why didn't you just leave? Or you must have done something. It's extremely complex, and people identify with both the offender and with the victim. So you have to be very clear on your position with this as well. So when we're looking at the cycle of violence, in summary, depending on where your client is up to at the moment, often it's after the acute explosion. So step 1 is the build-up. Step 2, there is something. That is usually when we will see most of our clients, is at stage 2, just post that event or the incident. And then they'll listen to us and they may go back, and then the honeymoon phase might come back in, the apology and the remorse. And then for us, we use this cycle to show people of, is there a pattern here? How often is that occurring? When do these things happen? Because you could end up working with both people to be able to help them navigate and understand what that cycle of violence is, and help them find some more adaptive coping mechanisms that are healthier for both parties, especially if they both agree they want to stay in the relationship. Then there's work to be done, because whatever they're doing now is not working and it's not effective. So we normalise survivor confusion and just say, look, it's normal to be really confused at this point. You've been under attack. And you just need to know the information to be able to make some decisions. But if I am concerned about your safety, I need to let you know that I've got to share that. And if I'm worried about you, I'm going to let you know that I will. There'll be nothing about you without you. So it helps identify predictable cycles and support safety planning and exit readiness. So a safety plan, a go bag, but sometimes they might, if we say, do you feel safe going home today? No, I don't. That's it. What they're standing in is what we're working with. All of that support is there. That's our role. We are going to be that lead worker, and we will stay in that space until we've got those supports there. We don't do them, but we connect them with people who will. And if there's a gap in the time they can be supported, then it is us. So we need to understand this unit thoroughly so that we can have good dialogue with those other agencies as well. But we have to also understand, where does our role start and end, so that we leave that open to the experts, those subject matter experts. If domestic family violence is an area that you want to specialise in, then learn as much as you possibly can. There's a lot of information out there about it. So this just shows that I can draw that on a serviette wherever I am, or on a piece of paper. And then I usually will say to the client, so when things are okay, do you think it's in this stage here around the making up? Yeah, well, that's what it was like when we first met. So I guess that's why they call it the honeymoon phase. Everyone's on their best behaviour, and they're wanting to impress that other person. Then there's the calm in this stage here. This is where we do our work. That is where the user of violence can also do their work. It cannot happen in the honeymoon phase, or right in the middle of that abuse, or when there is tension building. This is the space where we need to be able to work. So there were some promises made, and there's no abuse happening right now, and then the victim hopes the abuse is over. But if they don't get support, and it's not when they're in a calm state of mind, then it'll move back over to the tension again. The abuse will happen, and then it'll move back to that honeymoon. So that's why they refer to it as a cycle, because it does have a pattern. So the power and control wheel summary. And for us, it's about safety, planning, informing and educating. And then support legal, reporting and your case notes, because they may be subpoenaed, and you will need to be able to keep a record, because it could end up being something that your client might say, it is going to court, and I have to say that I've been getting some counselling. Then your notes will be subpoenaed. They will be heard in family court. They will be submitted as part of the evidence. So we need to make sure that our file notes are a statement of fact of events that took place and that the client stated. And you need to have a pattern. So that's why we work with different models, to be able to speak to that language. So there's some more around what coercive control is. So like I said, it is now in law in most states and territories. Ask yourself, is it in mine? And then go and find some information to support that. When you're doing your research, you can speak about what it was like in the 70s, what it was like in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the last 2 decades as well. So the very first women's refuge opened in England by a lady of the name of Erin Pissy. But before that, it was referred to as battered wife. And so kids ended up in institutions, and parents went separate ways, or kids were placed with kin, or once the institutions closed down in the mid-1960s, 1968, is when the last of the institutions were shut down. The ones that the government were involved in, where you were wards of the state. Then they opened up the foster placement, where it was more of a home-like environment, but it's absolutely fraught with its own as well, because people who are surviving that space will often talk about how that they continue to be abused. They're very vulnerable. So a good residential environment or good support, there are amazing people who do this work, and the agency that has oversight there is child safety, or whatever children's services you might call it in your state or territory. So you need to have a good understanding around the legal reforms that sit there for children. Would a 17-year-old go under the care of child safety? Very unlikely. Very unlikely beyond 15 and a half. Child safety tend to try and get in earlier. And then there's some refuges where they won't take a male child over the age of 7. So they try and put that survivor into accommodation very quickly. It may not necessarily be in that local area, could even be interstate. So they have a very strong network, and funding is around, but like I said, they're a tier 1. They work with tier 1 police, ambulance, health professionals, teachers in schools. They're all tier 1, all governed by the legislation and the standards that the government expect of them as a government agency. So the power and control wheel, like the second part of the application, how we use it is, it helps us with our casework and our conversations about patterns of behaviour. It's also a visual aid for clients to name experiences. I find it's helpful to just maybe show that picture rather than just talk it through. Strengthen safety planning and legal reporting. Oftentimes the client won't even understand what we're talking about, but if we can show a picture, it can be like, I see that. And then recognised as a tool across domestic family violence and legal frameworks. So you're working with a language that is used in the sector. So the key behaviours around coercive control. And then how do we apply it? If we are working with this model, it validates clients that have got no visible injuries, helps them understand that it is still abuse, helps define abuse patterns post-separation once they've left that relationship, and then supports push for protective legislation, and then invites a broader view of what risk and safety is. So you can still be abused after you've left that situation that's ongoing. So it can be emotional, psychological, socially, and financially. So oftentimes people will lose friends that they enjoyed together as a couple, where that's part of that coercion, telling a story about the other person, maybe labeling it by saying, oh, they're crazy, or they're a liar, or using those. So it can be very isolating as well for people. So safety is always first, our toolbox tips. Let's plan for different scenarios. So let's plan for something. What would it look like if you had left or you were ready to leave? Let's plan for that. Avoid asking, why did you stay? Focus on survival strength. Use that positive reinforcement. Respect ambivalence. It's often a trauma response, which means it's like, oh, just used to it. Just respect that. Don't correct them. Model boundaries and name what is and isn't safe. Let the client know. Okay, so I'll be sending out these slides for you just as some resources. You have your task 1, which is your quiz. You have your research report, which is quite in-depth, and you've got to back that up with evidence-based data. And then, of course, you have your role plays. Now, these are not assessor-led role plays. These are ones that you can do with somebody else. But if you're in classes live, then, of course, you can do them. And you've always got peers on tap to be able to act as a client as well. But otherwise, please use that link to see Oliver. And then, of course, you can contact us. Let me just change my screen, which, of course, you're going to do if you're in a role play. You're going to set the scene as well. So I'll just change my background so that you've got our learner support officer's email. So L, lowercase l, lowercase s, lowercase o, but capital L, S, O will find them as well, at hayderinstitute.edu.au. If you need to contact me as your trainer for the Diploma of Youth Work, which is what this recording is, it's Vicky, VIKI, at hayderinstitute.edu.au. And when you're doing your role plays, please watch those recordings in the resources. But let me just show you that I'm going to expect that you'll turn up dressed for your work. You'll notice in some of the resources that the scene that I have behind me is what I like to say is that this is my counselling room, and I have 2 chairs, and in front, hold on, I'm in reverse. Yeah, so we have an ottoman, and I can put a tray there with some water, but there's a nice garden to look outside. There's a door that I can exit behind, and the client can go and use the facilities if they need to. And when they walk in, there's pamphlets and brochures on the wall as well. So it's warm, the temperature is appropriate, colours are calm as well, and we just want our clients to feel safe and comfortable. That doesn't mean that they will feel safe and comfortable, but we need to be able to do everything that is within our control. So that's the final part of CHCDFV001 in this unit of competency. Please reach out to your learner support officers if you need some guidance, and also you're very welcome to ask your learner support officers to feed that information back to your trainers. It doesn't need to just be the trainer that takes your class. It can be any trainer at Hayder if they're rostered on, if there is a delay. But of course, I will always invite you to reach out. And then at the end of our classes, we have Q&A. Depends on our timing, of course. We do like to jump out at 9 p.m. Because many of us will start at 9 a.m. as well. So, but really, you can have one-on-ones once a month with your trainer or a trainer at Hayder. And if there's a few of you and you don't want to do your role plays in classes, if there's 2 or 3 of you, then you can come and book that as a smaller group. And I definitely will do that with you. I usually do role plays on a Wednesday night, but you book those in. So have an amazing week. It's a brand new unit next week. This is the end of this unit. And I hope that you've found that the information is really helpful. It certainly is a big part of our work when we're working with young people at risk.